After the long third step, which was step 13, now let's move to step 14, where we would want to do a very short step. So we already discussed about the importance of dispatcher servlet. We saw how dispatcher servlet receives it, identifies the right controller based on the URL, and controller executes the business logic. Controller returns back what and what? Modal, we have not tried it yet, but controller returns back the view name, and the dispatcher servlet identifies the current view using what? View resolver. And then the dispatcher servlet makes the model available to the view. I mean, we have not seen that yet, but we'll see that, and executes it. And dispatcher servlet would give a response back. What response? HTTP response back. And that's the flow which we discussed during the architecture of Spring MVC. So now what we will do during this small step is add logging framework Log4j. Spring Framework uses commons logging by default. We want to add Log4j so that we would be able to decide what logging level we want the Spring Framework to use. If we want to debug and understand Spring Framework more, it becomes very easier when we add a logging framework in. So let's add Log4j in this step. I would want to add in log4j.jar. One way I can do that is to download it, put it in the build path of Eclipse, and then restart the server and do everything manually. And the other way of doing it is by using Maven. Sure. Let's use Maven to add a dependency on Log4j. So how do you find the dependency for Log4j? Just go to Google and search for Log4j Maven dependency and you would be able to find it. The other way is just go into step 14 and Log4j. So search for Log4j. You'd see a dependency in. So the Log4j dependency is actually quite simple. I wouldn't even need a snippet for adding it in. So it's all that you need to do is open up your pom.xml. So let's go over to pom.xml. I used Ctrl+Shift+R. Go over to pom.xml. Go to the pom.xml tab and add in the dependency. So let's do this manually. So dependency, just like our packages. So a class has a package. A Maven artifact has a group ID. The artifact ID for the group ID for Log4j is also Log4j. How simple is it? So that's the same, Log4j. And now let's go ahead and add the artifact ID. Artifact ID for Log4j is Log4j. The same. And then this is the version. So basically in version we are saying which version of Log4j do you want. Just like we are using 4.2.2 release. So this is the latest, this is almost the latest version of Spring Web MVC, not the latest version. The latest version which is available is 4.2.4. And always one of the tips I can give you is just keep yourself a couple of releases down. Couple of minor releases down from the version which is being used. So if you go to 4.2.4 release, then you're kind of using the most latest version of Spring. I would actually stay a little down than that, just so that any of the latest bugs, somebody has played around with it and made sure everything is working fine. Yeah, but if you want really to play around with the latest version, go ahead and play around with it. I'm sure you'll learn a lot by doing that. Okay, now going back to Log4j, the version which we want to use is 1.2.17. So let's go ahead and add that in. We have now added in the dependency to Log4j. So for Log4j to work, what we need to do is we need to restart the server. So I'll kill the server because I'm adding a dependency, a jar. So that means the entire var file needs to be built again. So I'll restart the server. That's not a problem. Let's do that after a little while, after we have the properties. So for using Log4j, we need to add in a log4j.properties file. So what I'll do is I'll add in the source main resources. So source main resources. So resources is one of the folders. Source main resources is one of the folders which Maven by default, if you put anything in here, it would be available in the class path. That's how Maven defines it. So anything you put in source main Java is your source code. So anything you have in source main Java, until now we have put a lot of things in there, is the source code. And anything you put in source main resources are the property files, the XMLs, or anything else that you'd want to use during here. For example, the to-do servlet.xml, we could have put it in resources. That should not have been a problem as long as we point to the right place. And also, if you look at any other things, any other property files that you would want, you can put it in the resources. So now I would want to put the log4j.properties in here. So the way I can do that is right click, new file, and I'll call this log4j.properties. Very simple, isn't it? Log4j.properties, in the log4j.properties, I can tell different things. So I can say I want org.spring framework. I would want a lot of logging. I want everything to be logged. I can say everything. I can say org.log4j, log4j framework. I don't want everything to be logged, but let's assume there are 5 levels. I want configuration at level 6. What I'll do now is I'll take this snippet from our step14.md. So all that you need to do is search for log4j and this properties file comes up. So it's in source main resources, log4j.properties. That's where we have. I've copied this snippet in here. There are 5 important levels in log4j: error, warn, info, debug, and trace. The logger level is error. Then what would happen is that only when there's an error, there would be something in the log. When you put the error level at warn, you would see that there would be more information printed, but only warnings. And when you go to info level, it would also start printing a little bit of information. So when I'm loading an XML, I would probably print what is being loaded. And when you put level as debug, then it would start printing a lot more information. And when you put trace, it would print absolutely everything. So what I'll do during this particular step is now we have configured it as trace. So we can see what would happen when I put it at error. So I'll change this to error and start at the server. So let's put it at error and let's start the server up. You can also start up the server by using right click, run as maven build tomcat 7:run. This is kind of a shortcut which runs the last command which was run. You'd see that now there's very little information that is being printed. So what I'll do now is I'll clear the console and change it to trace. Let's see what's printed. Do you see that there is a lot of information being printed? Trace, debug, everything is being printed in here. One thing you should remember always is the fact that when I log something as error, then when the configuration is trace, it would also be printed. So when I say something is trace, when I'm setting the configuration to trace, then it would print everything. So error, warn, info, debug, trace. When I say it's debug, it would print all these 4 kinds of messages. When I say info, it prints all these 3 and so on. So when I say trace, then every level of logging would be printed, and that's why you would have a lot of logging on the screen. So that's a brief video or brief step where we tried to understand the logging framework.